I've been a commercial fisherman for 32 years, I believe now. I think I started when I was 12 years old for first finally getting paid, but I used to go on the boats right from when I was probably 7 or 8 and just always wanted to be out either with my dad on his boat or my uncles on their boats, and then my stepfather later on his, and now I'm on my own. Remember the first time I got, offered a job, I always got offered to, come out in the boat, and they used to kick you a couple $100 for, when you're 10 years old to kick some fish in. Well, that seemed like it was, millions of dollars when you're that young, and you can, go to the store, and when you can buy things that were less than $1 and you got a couple $100 in your pocket, you feel like a king. But I think when my uncle offered me a job when I was 13 years old, and I wasn't even expecting, I was just out on the boat for a ride, and the guy didn't show up, and he says, "You're gonna be the new tie-up man," and I thought he was joking, and I literally looked for the guy and he wasn't there, and I found out I really was the new tie-up man. So I got my start there, and then the next year was, full season. So also when you're salmon fishing, a tie-up man is the guy who ties the line to the beach to hold the net in place, and it's fairly dangerous job because all the strain on the line. I mean, if the strap that you're tying to breaks, it can go away, but if the line, that the net is held to, if it breaks, it comes back at you. So it's pretty dangerous. I mean, people have passed. Out of high school, I was ready to take the leap, and I did a work experience with the Department of Fisheries in my grade 12 year for 3 months. And once I was ready to go to college, but they weren't doing a whole lot of hiring at the time. It was kind of right around the turnover of like fisheries. There was the Mifflin plan. There was just, things were just going south in the fisheries, and they weren't gonna hire. And I thought, well, why am I gonna go to college to take a position that's not gonna be hiring right now? So I ended up staying in fishing, and I think it was probably the better call. Well, once I became a boat owner, and there's definitely a lot more revenue coming than being a deckhand, and especially if you have a couple good seasons, it's kind of like hitting the jackpot. So the one that we're on today is a commercial vessel that I built 3 years ago, trying to diversify to stay into the fishing game. We wanted to do prawns, herring, and salmon gill netting. So in order to be well diversified, you kind of need an all-around boat. I actually looked at building something totally different, and then my cousin talked me into, like, why don't you do this and you get 3 fisheries, you do the other one as one. And then I just all of a sudden it just came to me like, why wouldn't I? Of course, that just makes sense. And then the next vessel that we stay on, I bought that in 2013, I believe, or 2012 maybe. and whatchamacallit, we'd fish herring on it, halibut, salmon on that one as well. But in order to be diversified again, we need to keep guys working. We'll do roe herring. Usually that's in the month of March. Usually that could be just like a week to 2 weeks in between. Like, it's hard to tell because when the fish are ready to spawn, it changes from year to year. So generally it seems like it's always the first week of March, but there has been years it's been the middle of March. So it's kind of a crapshoot. But so we kind of just use the 2 week period from the 1st of March till the middle of March, and we kind of know that fishery. Then prawns is usually the first Thursday in May. The last couple of years when the pandemic was on, they pushed the seasons back a couple of weeks, and even the one year I think we started June the 4th, so it even went back even a month. So but now that we're back on the cycle, trying to get guys lined up, just because I think when it got pushed back, it helped some people, but there is other fishermen who do like tuna, and there's other things that kind of, when it got pushed into the month of July, and it just didn't really help them too much. We do bait herring in the winter, roe herring in the spring, and then salmon when it's available in the summer and the fall, and then halibut usually goes in the summertime. When we were younger, that was kind of the motto, I guess. It was you worked herring and you worked salmon, and then you kind of just lived off of unemployment for the winter months. But for us, it's just as times got tougher, you kind of needed to make more money as inflation, everything's changing in the world, the prices have gone up, and in order to survive, fishing 2 kind of fisheries a year just doesn't cut it. And obviously, in order to be more successful, I think you have to be working that much harder. Oh, starting out, just like everything else, right? It's a lot of learning curves. You make errors. You think about things a lot, and you're trying to, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? Second guessing yourself. Oh, it's like an adrenaline rush. There's certain fisheries that just, your blood is just pumping. You're looking at the clock, waiting for opening time. Especially this prawn fishery, it's still a derby style fishery, so it's kind of, who's there first kind of thing. And it's definitely stressful. It's not as easy as it sounds. I mean, I've been doing it for 12 years, and there's still things that, you think you got it figured out, and it's like, nope, wrong. So there's just so many things that can go wrong, and it's just, it's still a stressful industry to be involved in. costs are getting higher, just with the cost of petroleum and fuel and oils. Everything is just getting to be pretty pricey. I mean, an engine rebuild, if something goes wrong, can be, upwards of $150,000 for a new engine. So yeah, things can be, unless you're on top of your maintenance, it can be costly. So depending on which fishery we're doing, like the fishery we're doing on the prawns right now, is we're probably burning anywhere from 250 to 300 liters a day. But when we're salmon fishing on the seine boat, I can probably burn maybe 1,000 liters in a day, if depending, or over 2 days kind of thing. It's hard to put a thought into someone unless they have the ambition. I mean, trying to recruit just people off the street, to me it's either in you or it's not. I've always felt like most people, if their parent was a fisherman, or if their dad was, you most likely followed in those footsteps. And for some reason, like, that's how I got involved. It was just, that's what my dad did, his dad, and my uncles, and all of our family, like most of the males, were all in the fishing industry. And it's kind of one of those things you can't get away. One of my favorite days would probably have to be probably 2010, when the big sockeye, like the biggest run in 100+ years that commercial fishermen were part of. But yeah, that season was like no other. I mean, it didn't matter where we set our nets. Like, we have our good spots. Like, low water sets are usually you get your biggest sets. And I remember one time we were watching fish go north when the tide was running south, and I said to my stepdad at the time, I said, "Hey, do you see all those fish going over there?" And he says, "No." And I said, "Look, they're right over there." And we went and we set, and my deckhand that was helping me at the time, he said, "We missed him, look on the right side." And I said, "Turn around and look to your left." And he looked over, and the amount of fish that was coming, it was just like, there was so much. And I mean, we just went right around the school of fish. We filled our boat completely with one set, and I don't even know how many we dumped. I figure we probably had close to 35,000 fish that set. It was just the biggest set I've ever seen. It was just unbelievable. Power, like, our hydraulics were lagging because there was just so much weight, and it was just like, I just never seen it, and I don't think I'll ever see it again. My dad told me a story one time when he used to fish with my uncle, probably in the 60s, early 60s, that they had a set where the whole net was completely full. There was bubbles, fish jumping everywhere, and back then they used to use cotton web, and the cotton web ripped. And he said, like, there was just so much fish, and even after the hole, they still ended up with a few thousand. Oh yeah, so low water is like generally when the fish rise up, and most guys, when you're salmon fishing, will get a pretty good set. So, like, in the past, like 20 years ago, guys used to literally anchor out for a week or even sometimes 2 weeks, knowing that when it did open, you're waiting on the tide for that certain set. And there's times where I've gone and had 10 to 15,000 on one set, and rather than trying to work through the day, most people, have a plan, and you hopefully get to that set first, and you kind of make hay while the sun's shining again, just because those are the days you want to be there. And it just works out. Like, even on a quota fishery, I still get antsy, and I'll go anchor out for a few days prior, just because rather than us working harder, I know that I can make one set to catch most of our fish compared to working throughout the day, and fuel costs are high. And at least with our reserve, like back when or not just mine, but when most of the reserves had lots of fishermen, like everybody would just go out and you basically said, hey, so-and-so is coming in with fish, and you went down there and you got some. Everybody kind of just gave it away because you were able to put those costs into the season when you're having a good salmon season. So you didn't mind spending $500 or $1,000 on fuel, but now those costs are 4 or 5 times that. So, and able to go out and work your boat and stuff and then just give things away for free. I think people have just changed their minds. I mean, it's just part of who I am. I got to supply people the best I can. I also fish for a company called Scarlet Point out of Port Hardy, so that's who we do our halibut fishing for. I do my roe herring for them, but then I do bait herring for Walcan in the winter, and then I sell my prawns to them, and then my salmon to them. And then at Legay, we do the FSC fishery for them, part of our license agreement, but then also when they're looking to purchase extra fish to give to the Five Nations, I sometimes do that for them as well, usually a little bit of the salmon side, and we may do a little bit of halibut when they ask, depending on how much extra funds there is to spread around.
Prawns has gotten a lot more demand the last probably 3 or 4 years through First Nations, but halibut's still a demand, but salmon is our biggest FSC fishery, I would think, just because it goes a long ways.
Yeah, so most of the other nations are just never were able to keep the tradition alive. They had fishermen in the past, but as as regulations changed and as the industry kind of died down, I mean, nobody wanted to stick around, and it's kind of tough to jump in without having any knowledge. So I think that's why lots of these other First Nations are struggling to get FSC these days. Just you have to reach out to find someone willing to do it, and it's getting tougher just based on price of fuel. I mean, back 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, guys were, you could afford to do it quite cheap, but now it's just you can't. It's just, and it's tough to put those costs onto a First Nations. It's not, they don't have a lot of extra funds for that reason. That's depending on their chief and council, and if their finance committee or however they figure out like what they have in their budget in order to supply their members. I mean, most First Nations obviously want to try and do what they can for them, but I mean, when your funding isn't there, it's also tough to try and do something good. Yeah, we still follow all the same rules when it comes to the commercial side. We have our First Nations rules as well, so we do have certain rules that apply. It's just basically a food fishery. It's not for sale. There is these economic opportunity fisheries happening with a lot of First Nations in their territories these days, which is kind of like a rights-based fishery, but we don't have any of those yet in our territory.
And we've had some bumper years, 2010, 14, 16, 18, and then we haven't had anything since. So it was kind of like that even in the 2000s as well. There, you get a couple of good years, but there's a lot more lean years. And when conservation comes first, it is what it is. You gotta leave the stocks in the water in order to hope they come back in 4 years.
It can be frustrating. I mean, especially your preseason planning. I mean, I'll just use last year for example. They announced, I want to think like 60% of the coast was being closed down for salmon fishing. Well, especially if you're buying, like a brand new net and you're expecting to use it, you're spending $3,000-4,000, and then all of a sudden you can't. It's tough to recoup those losses. Not everybody has diversification to recoup their losses, I guess. DFO has kind of been the same. It's very hard to figure them out, I guess is the best way to put it politely. Even chatting with the fisheries minister, we've tried to talk to her about the recent herring reduction for the quota this past year. I mean, we were hoping to look for some Indigenous knowledge. You know, the fishery takes place in our traditional territories, and you know, they didn't even rely on us. So it can be frustrating when they don't reach out, especially when they're looking for stakeholders to have some input.
We do like a half smoked, so it's kind of we smoke it for a day and a half in a big traditional smokehouse. I usually do it with my dad. There, you know, when I was younger, there used to be maybe 10 smokehouses on the reserve. Now we're down to 2, and it's just a dying art form. Not many people are doing it. The younger people just, you know, traditions are just not being passed on enough. And then, I mean, we do another one where we call it gallus. It's kind of like dried. It's very thin. It almost looks like beef jerky. And then it's a 5-day process as well. Like it's a delicacy for lots of people. It's just it's another art form that's just not shown enough. And I do it just because I want to keep it going. Like there's only a few people that are doing it, and I just can't let it die off that quick. When I first started, I asked a lot of questions. I talked to a lot of fishermen that I knew that were retiring, and just trying to, you know, pick their brain. And I think, you know, I'm at that age where I want to pass on that knowledge to the younger generation. I mean, in order for us to continue to be in this industry, somebody has to teach you. And it's just, there's just not enough kids coming up and wanting to be fishermen unless you're working year round. And it's tough to get into the industry knowing that you may or may not fish salmon, you know, every 4 years, and it's unreliable. So I definitely want to pass that on to either my nephews or, you know, other members that are around.